your interpretation of Donald Trump's pre-debate media tour of complaints and excuses.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. Listen, I think this is what we've come to expect from Donald Trump when it comes to debates, right? This is a guy who has a history of complaining about debates, skipping out on debates, trying to use them as spectacle for his advantage. I think the problem for Donald Trump, though, is when he takes the stage, the American people are going to see the fundamental choice in this election. They're going to see on one side of the stage President Biden, who's fighting relentlessly for the American people to bring people together to get things done. And on the other side, they're going to see Donald Trump, who's waging a campaign of grievance, who's only in it for himself and is making it clear every single day on the stump, as Senator Warren pointed out, just how extreme he would be in a second term. So that's the choice that the American people are going to be confronted with when they tune in on Thursday night, regardless of what Trump tries to do on the front end here.
Well, speaking of on the front end, ahead of the debate, the Trump campaign is holding a Black American business leaders barbershop roundtable. Now, Donald Trump says he's making inroads with black voters, and polls do show Trump ahead in Georgia. But I seem to recall when I traveled with you and the president down to Atlanta just after the State of the Union address back on March 9th, we went to a black-owned business. So I'm just wondering, how does the Biden-Harris campaign see Georgia?
Yeah, well, we see Georgia as incredibly competitive. The president obviously won the state of Georgia in 2020, and we expect to do so again. It's going to be incredibly close and competitive, but we know that we have the right candidate and the right team in place to get the votes and win the state of Georgia again. I think if you want to talk about black voters and black business, for example, I'm not quite sure why Donald Trump wants to talk about black business, because we know by the end of his term, black businesses were shuttered because of the way that he fumbled the COVID response. He was telling us to inject bleach instead of doing his job. And the result was black people left disproportionately dead and black businesses disproportionately shuttered. I think the only things that actually went up by the end of Donald Trump's first term for black America were the unemployment rate and the uninsured rate. So we're happy to wage this campaign on that front. If you put that up against the president's historic record of accomplishment for black America, record low black unemployment in the first term, black wealth growing by 60% since before the pandemic, the fastest rate of black small business growth in a generation, historic investments into HBCUs to the tune of $16 billion. That is a choice that's going to be easy for black America to make in this election. And we're confident that if we continue to communicate that contrast of visions, that contrast of values, that we're going to win this election, both in Georgia and across the country, of course.
Michael, let's look at another key state. In a recent interview, Jen O'Malley Dillon, chair of the Biden-Harris reelection campaign, said, quote, "What's happening in North Carolina, the extreme laws that are moving through the state legislature, a restrictive abortion law that's worse than most other places in the country, a beyond extreme candidate running for governor in Mark Robinson. If you put all those pieces together, we really see that the state is in play." So, Michael, North Carolina will begin to mail absentee ballots starting on September 6th. So this might be the only debate North Carolina voters see. What will it take to flip North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina is absolutely in play. I think if you want to look at any indicator of that, look exactly where the president is going after he leaves Atlanta. We're going directly to Raleigh, North Carolina, to organize and rally our growing grassroots army in the Tar Heel state. We know that given everything that you just described, the demographic makeup, the extremism that's been on display in the state legislature there, obviously the extreme MAGA candidate that they have in the state of North Carolina, in many ways it's a microcosm of what we're looking at across the country here. And so we know that if we relentlessly engage in the state of North Carolina, that we're going to be able to come out on top. That's true in Georgia. It's true in North Carolina. It's, of course, true in the blue wall states as well. We know that we have the resources, the candidate, the message, the vision, and the values to win across the country here. And that's the type of campaign that we are building. We've got 300 field offices open across the country. We have over 1,000 staff now on the ground across all the battleground states. And so that's true in North Carolina. It's true in Georgia. And I think it stands in stark contrast to the lack of an operation that the Trump team has at this stage of race. We know in an incredibly polarized and divided electorate where you have two candidates that are both widely well known, the operations that you have in place matter that much more. And there's only one campaign at this stage of the race that is actually doing the work to reach the voters that are deciding the election. Every dollar that people chip in when they go to joebiden.com is fueling that grassroots army that we are building in the battlegrounds across the country. So we're foot on the gas coming off of the debate in Atlanta. We'll be on to North Carolina and across the battleground states from here.
Well, you mentioned earlier blue wall states, so let's talk about one of them. I want you to listen to what a Pennsylvania voter told NBC News today.
I'm looking to see that Joe Biden does the, accentuates what he's already done, and to really say this is my plan to improve that.
So what will Joe Biden, President Biden, say about his plan to build upon his record in the next 4 years?
Yeah, listen, I think you'll hear a lot of that on Thursday night, right? He'll talk about the historic record of accomplishment, everything from 15 million jobs created since the day he took office, 800,000 of those being manufacturing jobs, the work that he's done to lower costs for American people, capping the cost of insulin at $35 for our seniors, for example. But he'll increasingly talk about the work that we're going to accomplish in a second term, beginning with restoring Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. He'll talk about continuing to lower costs for Americans, expanding that $35 insulin cap to all Americans in a second term, expanding the $2,000 out-of-pocket prescription drug cap to all Americans in a second term, continuing to add more medications to Medicare negotiation, for example, continuing the work that we're going to do to make sure that we actually live in a country with a fair tax code so that a billionaire never pays less in taxes than a school teacher and a nurse, and making sure that we understand that if Donald Trump is elected, none of that is going to happen, right? We're only going to have a more dark, dangerous, and chaotic vision for where he wants to take the country. He's going to get on that stage and talk about the fact that he thinks the extreme state-level abortion bans that he's responsible for are playing out brilliantly. He's going to make it clear that he's comfortable with more abortion bans playing out across the country if he's able to regain power. He's going to talk about more corporate handouts and tax giveaways to the ultra-wealthy on the backs of the middle class if he's able to regain power. And he's going to wage his campaign of revenge and retribution from the debate stage, continuing to attack democracy, promising to pardon the insurrectionists of January 6th. That's the fundamental contrast that the American people are going to see on that debate stage, and they're going to see through the duration of this campaign moving forward.
Well, Michael, Trump often uses the phrases Biden migrant crime when talking about immigration. He'll likely use that phrase on Thursday. But the question is, how will the president respond if he doesn't?
Yeah, listen, I mean, Donald Trump, there's no tragedy that Donald Trump won't try to exploit for his own personal gain. Obviously, every last one of these is a tragedy. We understand that, the president understands that, but we're not going to let Donald Trump misconstrue the facts. The fact of the matter is that crime went up under Donald Trump's presidency. Crime is down under Joe Biden's presidency. Donald Trump doesn't care about crime. He doesn't care about border security. I think that's evident by the fact that he's the one who blew up the border security deal when we had a bipartisan deal in the Senate. With the president, you have somebody who's actually trying to bring people together relentlessly to fix our problems. That's true of border security. That's true of every challenge that the American people face. And so that's, again, a fundamental contrast that the American people are going to see on the debate stage on Thursday night.
One more question for you, Michael. Donald Trump will surely try to exploit Democratic divisions over the war in Gaza. How will President Biden put the focus back on what Trump's policies would mean for Palestinians?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump makes it very clear that he would not make life better for Palestinians or Americans or anybody for that matter. I think what the president is going to do is make sure that the American people understand that they elected him precisely because he does not view issues of global security through the lens of politics. He views them as the commander-in-chief. That's what he's been doing in the Middle East. That's why the American people elected him in the first place, and that's why they'll re-elect him in November, because he is actually doing his job. He does not view these issues through the lens of what's best for him and himself. That's obviously what Donald Trump does, and that stands in stark contrast to the president who the American people elected.
Michael, I lied. I have one. This is the last question. I'm sorry. This is the last question. What will success look like Thursday night?
Listen, I think success is the American people having a clear understanding of the choice in this election, because that's exactly what they'll see when these two candidates take the stage. They will walk away from the debate seeing a president in Joe Biden who is fighting relentlessly for the American people to get things done for them. And across from that, they'll see Donald Trump, who's increasingly unhinged, who's running a campaign now as a convicted felon, who's convicted precisely because he was willing to do or say anything to gain and hold on to power, and is now promising to enact revenge and retribution if he's able to regain power. That's what the American people are going to walk away from after they've watched the debate on Thursday night.
Whereas President Biden and I stood up to the NRA and the gun lobby, Donald Trump bowed down. After the horrors of El Paso and Dayton, the former president said he would take action. And then he folded. He failed to stand up to the gun lobby.
Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost of Florida. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee and a National Advisory Board member for the Biden-Harris campaign. Congressman Frost, welcome back to The Last Word. So the Surgeon General calls the gun epidemic a, quote, moral crisis. And polling shows that nearly 6 in 10 U.S. adults say that they worry sometimes, almost every day or every day, about a loved one being a victim of firearm violence. That's a solid majority for an issue. And the contrast couldn't be clearer between standing up and bowing down to the NRA.
Of course, the contrast couldn't be any clearer. And it's 60% of Americans that say they worry about themselves or a family member dying due to firearms. And it's even more. 90% of Americans want things like universal background checks and want action. And so even more, a larger percent of Americans actually want something done. On one hand, you have President Joe Biden, who signed the law, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Today is the 2-year anniversary of it. And I encourage people, go online, look at what the White House has put out. They've put out a progress report on exactly how this law has saved lives. And what we know to be true is gun violence, homicides around the entire country has gone down. And there's so much more work to do. That's on one hand. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who, when asked about mass shootings, said, get over it. That's his response to the families of Parkland, to the families of Uvalde, to the families of the children who are gunned down every day across this country. Get over it. That's unacceptable.
You know, the Surgeon General's advisory notes Black Americans endure the highest rates of firearm homicides, while suicide rates are highest among veterans, older white individuals, and younger American Indian or Alaska Native people. As a National Advisory Board member for the Biden campaign, how is the campaign prioritizing these groups when it comes to reducing firearm violence?
In a very large way, the campaign is prioritizing in the way we communicate with voters, where we go and communicate with voters. But also on the other side, it's the action that the president's taken. I mean, if you look, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has a record amount of money going towards what's called community violence intervention. This is giving money to community groups that work at identifying who's more likely to shoot someone and who's more likely to be shot. And funding these programs helps us end the violence before it happens. A lot of people, especially in Congress, want to talk about how to react to gun violence. I want to be a part of the conversation on how we make sure people don't die in the first place. And also, Jonathan, I want to impress on how big of a deal this is. Today, the Surgeon General of the United States declared gun violence as a public health crisis and emergency. This opens up it opens up a lot for us in terms of the politics of this on the Hill, and hopefully will allow us to get more done. You know, similar announcements and similar reports were put out by the Surgeon General before action was taken on HIV/AIDS, before action was taken on smoking, and on big ticket health issues. And so I think this is really a turning point in the gun violence prevention movement, and of course, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Congressman Frost, Dr. Jonathan Metzl wrote a Time magazine op-ed with the headline, "Guns are not just a public health problem," where he says, and I'm quoting, "Gun laws by themselves will have relatively little effect in changing the contours of the American gun debate if they don't go hand in hand with material investments that take seriously people's safety concerns and reward community cohesion over armed tribalism. Gun laws have the greatest effect if joined with investments in lived environment, fixing streetlights, creating parks and green spaces, jobs programs, and rebuilding civic infrastructure. Public safety and community resiliency can reduce gun crime at rates that supersede those produced by gun laws alone." It's a twofold strategy, but Congressman, how do we get the investment from elected officials?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I always tell people we're going to end gun violence in 3 different ways. We got to do it at the same time. 1, gun regulation and make sure guns don't get in the wrong hands. 2, ensuring that we invest in community violence intervention so that way community groups have the resources to break the cycle of violence. And number 3, creating a country where people don't feel the need to use a gun to solve their problems in the first place. So if you want to be the gun violence person, you're going to also have to be the healthcare person, the jobs person, the poverty person, the infrastructure person. Oh, wait. These are all big bills that President Biden has signed into law over the last few years. And that's what we need to look at. It's not just one laundry list of gun regulation, even though it's important. I agree with what that article said. It's the totality of how we create an environment and a society where people don't need to turn to violence to feed their kids and to feed their families. And that's why our agenda, the Democratic agenda, is one that, yes, will make sure guns don't get in the wrong hands, but also is going to make sure that you have a good paying union job, you have what you need in terms of infrastructure to make sure that you can live the life you want to live. All these issues are connected, and it's part of what gives me so much hope, Jonathan, for the future of this country, especially young voters. You ask them what they care about, they're not going to tell you one thing, they're going to tell you several things because they see how all of these issues are connected. It's the same thing and how we're going to end gun violence.
You know, also, Dr. Metzel believes that the national gun debate is rooted deeply in political identity and that many in this country view guns not as a health risk, but a form of protection. So how do we change this divide to reduce gun violence?
Well, to what I was just saying, I mean, I think people need to feel safe. And look, I've had these very difficult conversations, especially during the Black Lives Matter uprising. To be honest, when I was on the streets, there were several of my organizers that I would be working with who told me, Maxwell, I'm going to go get a gun in a few days because we were threatened by white supremacists, because I was doxxed online, because I'm scared for my life. And the fact of the matter is there are real safety concerns for many people, black folks, poor people, working people, indigenous folks across the country who have a fear and want to arm themselves. And look, to be clear, this agenda isn't trying to disarm every American, right? This isn't what we're fighting for. What we're fighting for is responsible, common sense policy coupled with preventative measures so we don't even get to a point where the gun is fired in the first place. But making sure that we expand what public safety means is important. And for too long, Jonathan, when you think about public safety, the only thing we think about is law enforcement, which plays a big role in it. But what we also need to do is ensure that the community is also centered in the conversation of public safety. And again, community violence intervention programs are evidence-based. And if you look at the report from the Surgeon General, he uses data and facts to show how if we put more money into these community-based programs, we can really help end gun violence and also help our communities feel safer, because that is a real concern and we got to address it.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.